I thought it was a lot of fun because I love marathon swimming anyway. But it is just this kind of a metaphor for my life that, it's not something I control. It's something I go with and have a skill set to navigate. But at the end of the day, it's not up to me what happens. And, that really became apparent to me with childlessness. I just thought when I first met my wife, I thought, okay, well, boy meets girl, have a lot of fun together, fall in love, get married, and kids will come when they come. And well, it turns out that's not what happened. And then with the adoption process that we tried over the 5 years or so, I thought, well, my analogy that I use in the book and what I was thinking at the time was, well, it's like a triathlon, it's hard work, put one foot in front of the other, and enough time passes. If you don't give up, well, it eventually happened. And well, it turns out that's not what happened.
Hello, and welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, a childless community podcast with Michael Hughes, Berenice Smith, and me, Sarah Lawrence. If you're new to this podcast, we're here to delve beneath the surface of the childless identity, to cover what's going on in the wider community, and to look at the topics that affect us. Our goal is to help and support those of you out in the community by sharing the stories and the voices that make up our narrative, so that you too can begin to find yours. We also aim to inform and educate those who aren't members of our community so that they can begin to understand and support those people in their lives who are facing a life without children. In this episode, we're joined by Rob Hutchings, a former competitive triathlete turned adventure marathon wild swimmer and author. Rob has the drive and adventure of a dozen people. While he's travelled the world and is a yoga teacher with a passion for adventures, his biggest challenge to date is the first known swim of the length of the Clutha River in New Zealand. We spoke to Rob about his passion for adventure, his challenges with childlessness, and being the nosy people we are, we also asked him about what adventures he has planned next. As you'll hear from the podcast, many adventures are coming up for Rob. There really is no stopping the bloke. We hope you enjoy it.
Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah.
And then, of course, we'll get into the nitty gritty. So, okay, Canadian, Australian, live in New Zealand. So there's a nice, rich story there.
So, basically, well, I grew up in Newfoundland, Canada. Newfoundland is often the part where nobody's heard of. It's the far east of Canada. And I grew up starting to do triathlons there and did my chiropractic education. I'm a chiropractor in Christchurch, New Zealand now. I did my chiropractic education in Bournemouth, England. That's where the British Chiropractic School is. And after that, I moved to Australia, and a few years after that, met my wife and lived there for 15 or so years, and a brief year in Singapore. And then we both jumped the ditch. That's what we call the Tasman down here. To New Zealand, where we've been for the last just over 4 years. So now my wife and I both have funny accents over here. So yeah. Wow. So it's been a bit of a nomadic life for me. My wife's been somewhat nomadic since she's met me, but we're very happy here in New Zealand, and I'm going to travel a lot more now that travel's a thing again with COVID. But hopefully I'm going to not move country again. I think I've done that enough.
Why? You've been all over the place. So Newfoundland, you called it? Is that like the dog? Is that where the dogs come from? That's how I know it.
Yeah, we call it Newfies. We just refer to ourselves as Newfies. We pronounce it Newfoundland. Kind of, if you say it slowly enough, it sounds like Newfoundland. It is Newfoundland. Some people mispronounce it as thinking New Finland as in Scandinavia, and the Americans tend to mispronounce it saying Newfoundland. We just tend to kind of skip over the found and say Newfoundland and put the emphasis on land. But it is where the Newfoundland dogs are, and the full province is called Newfoundland and Labrador. Labrador is part of the mainland, and well, they have the Labrador Retriever. So a fun fact about Newfoundland is we're the only place in the world that gets 2 dogs.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two of the best breeds as well. Wow. There's a bloke up the road. There's a bloke up the road that's got one. He looks like a bear. He's gorgeous. I was just like, I have to have a cuddle every time I walk past him. I, say, all right, to the bloke, and then I'm like, oh, make fuss at the dog. I don't even know the chap's name. I know the dog's name, but not the chap. Never mind.
That's generally the way it is, Sarah. No one knows his name. Everyone knows the dog's name. That's just how life is when you have a dog. It's just how it goes. So which part of New Zealand are you in at the moment, Rob?
South Island. I live in Christchurch, and I've been there for 4 years, and Christchurch seems to suit me really well because I really like the mountains, rivers, and lakes, and been making full use of that since I've been here. And my wife loves it too, and her being Australian, she really likes it that she can see bodies of water like the beautiful lakes that aren't the ocean, because being Australian, that kind of seeing rivers that actually have a lot of water in it is pretty foreign to her, but it's pretty similar to where I grew up with, except we don't have bears here. When you go out in New Zealand, there's nothing. When you go out in the back country in New Zealand, there's nothing out there that thinks you look like lunch. So that's pretty cool.
That is a relief, isn't it? So you talk a lot in the introduction to your book, and also all of the material I've read around it. You talk, and you've said it yourself actually, about being a nomad. So how has the last few years affected you? How have you been feeling about that?
Well, I mean, I think I'm pretty much, I'm old enough now to know that I don't know what's going to happen. And obviously COVID really showed you we really don't know what's going to happen. In addition to moving a lot, I've done a lot of traveling, and I've touched on only a small portion of the travels that I've done in my book. But I don't know that I would have spent a whole lot of time going overseas in the last few years anyway, because the way I've been looking at it is people come from all over the world to see this beautiful country down here. And just kind of, before I spend any holiday time and holiday money going elsewhere, I really feel like I want to see a lot more of New Zealand. So even if COVID had never been a thing, I obviously don't know with certainty, but I mean, I'm pretty confident at least most of that time I would have just been wanting to see New Zealand anyway. And for the most part, not entirely, but most of COVID, we had pretty good travel freedom on South Island anyway. So I don't know that I would have traveled much overseas. Definitely have a lot of other overseas destinations that I want to get to, but I'm going to see more of New Zealand first.
Yeah, very wise actually. That's kind of something I sort of got to learn to live with when we got the dog. We got a rescue dog, and we found that we couldn't do the things that we wanted to do before. It clips you in, didn't want to put her in kennels, don't want to do that, the cost, but also just I've got a dog and I want to take her on holiday. So actually we've seen so much more of the UK, and you forget where I live in Cambridge, people pay quite a lot of money to come here, and you think, oh yes, maybe I ought to just be a tourist in my own place and actually sort of sit with where I live and explore it. And goodness me, you've got so much wonderful things on your doorstep there. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everywhere I've lived, a lot of people tend to tell me, I think this is, not unique to New Zealand, and, but people tend to tell me like, wow, you've seen more of the country than I have. And I've been here my whole life. And, and I found that in Newfoundland, and I found that in elsewhere in Canada where I've lived. And then I did my best to see as much of Britain and the surrounding area that I could. And people who lived everywhere I've lived always keep, it's a recurring thing that I seem to see a lot more of the places than a lot of the locals do. And that's just because I think I'm just very explorative by nature. I've always been that way, and reasonably active, and I like seeing the world at the pace of a bike, and in the ocean, and swimming and running and hiking lots of places. So you get to see a lot of countryside given what I do.
Yeah.
And from a very different angle probably to most people. I mean, not many people are going to put themselves in a river. That's quite a take on something.
I mean, I'm the only one who swam the Clutha, and we'll talk, I guess, in depth about that shortly. But like just just recently at Easter Sunday, I swam the full length of Milford Sound, which is one of New Zealand's natural icons. It's the iconic fjord. I mean, there's a whole fjordland down in the southwest corner, but Milford Sound is the icon. And just on Easter Sunday past, I swam the entire length of the fjord. So I saw, most people see the fjord from a boat, and well, I saw it from swinging my arms in the water. And some of the boats that went past, people were kind of blown away, or kind of like, "Whoa, with this guy idiot actually swimming out there." I mean, I had support boats and kayaks, a support boat and kayaks with me, but I mean, it was 6-hour swim to get from where the fjord meets the open ocean back into land, and it was just, in terms of beauty from a swim, I think it was probably the most beautiful swim I've ever done, which is pretty, it was incredible.
Wow. I'm curious, Rob, because we were got the book, got the notes.
Yep. Yep.
Obviously, you talk a lot about racing in the book, Downriver Nomad. But you do you get something different out of every single sort of swim or triathlon that you do? Because it sounds like you're doing it and it keeps you going. But is it because it gives you something different, or is it something else?
Well. There's a lot of things I get out of it. I mean, as you know, I started as a pretty hopeless athlete. There was no natural talent involved here, put it that way. So when I joined swimming and became, and I don't want to make it sound like, I was the best swimmer in the world. I mean, I joke, when people ask me about it, Michael Phelps has never, ever called me for training advice, so put it that way. And he probably won't ever. It became a thing of, well, can I do this? And swimming became important to me because I always tried team sports to begin with, which was a miserable failure because I can't do anything involving a ball. And swimming was one of those things where, even if you weren't very good, you became a bench warmer. You didn't have to be a bench warmer like I was in basketball. And, and then the people that I met there, two of the guys in particular who I talk about in the book, they were triathletes, and I had known what a triathlon was, but never thought of myself as such. And I just, one day I just got it in my head that I wanted to see if I could. And so when I started doing triathlons, it was, can I actually do this? And then over the years as a teenager, I started to find my feet and started to do reasonably well in the triathlons. And then it became, well, how good can I do? And, I never had the natural talent to become the world champion, but I went to the world championships. And then going beyond that, to the really long distance triathlons like Ironman and that sort of thing. And then at a certain point, realized that I just wanted to not only compete and do triathlons. It got to the point where I knew I could do a triathlon, and I just wanted to start doing more adventurous things, but keeping the sort of the triathlon theme. And swimming was always sort of my strength. And then I started doing all these expeditions that were either on foot, on wheels, or in the water, or sometimes a combination of 2 or 3 of those. And that's where I've arrived at now in the Clutha River swim, the 5-day swim from a little town called Wanaka to the Pacific. That was, I always wanted to do we used to call it trekking back where I grew up, but in New Zealand they call it tramping. So we could call it swim trekking or swim tramping. And, and river swimming just became something I really, really enjoyed. And for the reasons I talked about in my book, you can't control a river. And to me, that sort of became apparent in my life as well, with the childlessness and some of the other things. And when my father went off the rails when I was a teenager, I mean, he was always a bit of a drinker, but really got out of hand when I was a teenager. And after he drunkenly attacked me for the first time, I had the best triathlon I ever did. And I viewed that as a way of taking control of my life. And I sort of thought, well, triathlon is how I can stay in control and make sure I, stay on the straight and narrow. And plus, I had the added benefit of really, really enjoying doing triathlons and, really I didn't fully realize it at the time, but I thought it was a thing about taking control and, making pretty strong decisions. And in retrospect, probably too strong. Like, I didn't want to become an alcoholic, and coming from a line of them, I thought, okay, the best way to not be an alcoholic is to never ever drink. And it took me into my 30s to realize that having a glass of wine once a week or so is not going to turn me into an alcoholic. And I found that I enjoyed having a glass of red wine. But I used to have in my early 30s a bit of guilt with red wine, because I thought, that would lead me down that road. But well, it didn't. It was something I could, I don't want to say control, but yeah. The subject of control became really important to me. And with river swimming in particular, obviously in the mountains, there's things like weather that, you got to be, aware of, and you can't plan for it. You can't control it if it happens, if you're out there. But river swimming, you can't control what the water's going to do. You just have to go with it and just have this kind of unique skill set. Some could argue that river swimming is kind of a useless skill set unless you happen to fall into a river accidentally. But to me, it felt like I thought it was a lot of fun, because I love marathon swimming anyway. But it is just this kind of a metaphor for my life that, it's not something I control. It's something I go with and have a skill set to navigate. But at the end of the day, it's not up to me what happens. And, that really became apparent to me with childlessness. I just thought, when I first met my wife, I thought, okay, well, boy meets girl, have a lot of fun together, fall in love, get married, and kids will come when they come. And well, it turns out that's not what happened. And then with the adoption process that we tried over the 5 years or so, I thought, well, my analogy that I use in the book and what I was thinking at the time was, well, it's like a triathlon, it's hard work, put one foot in front of the other, and enough time passes. If you don't give up, well, it eventually happened. And well, it turns out that's not what happened. And I think that's why river swimming, in addition just the pure fun of it, became really, really important to me. And what I always had it in my mind, I wanted to write a book. And when I did the Clutha River Swim, I thought, oh, geez, well, that was a good conclusion to a book. And as I started thinking it all through and putting it together, it started to make, I won't say perfect sense to me, but it made a lot more sense to me.
Really got the sense in the book, actually, that it was building to that. When you're sort of looking through, because I always have a sneaky peek, and it went this, and then it flipped the river. I was like, oh, okay, this is what we're building towards. But yeah. I was intrigued because you sort of, in the book, it very much, I very much got your mindset that it was, well, if I keep pushing, if I keep working hard enough, I can achieve. And I think you say it in a couple of times. You say, I can do this, I can do this, I can achieve anything. And you used it as well in your chiropractic story around the lady that you got walking again. So you get this real sense of you feeling like, if I believe strong enough, if I work hard enough, I can do this. And then it kind of, when you talk about the childlessness and the adoption, I kind of felt my heart sink for you as I read it, because it's like, oh, it's kind of blown a hole in that whole ethos that you've got. How did you, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get through that? Because it does kind of go against it felt very much like your values.
It went against everything that I believed for a very long time. And that, as a triathlete, I'd never failed to finish a race in my life. I never quit a workout. I was, the never give up mentality is kind of ingrained in the sport. If even a short triathlon is, if you go fast enough, it's pretty hard. And, even after years and years of doing it, I'm almost 47 now. And I started doing it when I was, just about to turn 14. Barring something disastrous going wrong in a triathlon, I'm confident I can do it, but you still have to go a long way and keep putting, first one stroke in front of the other, keep spinning your legs, and then keep one foot in front of the other. And if you don't quit and nothing really, really disastrous goes wrong, you'll get there. And that's the attitude I kind of had towards, well, everything I ever did. And then when I went up to this really unexpected thing of childlessness, I mean, first with childlessness, I guess I was shocked because, I'm reasonably healthy. I'd always avoided the nasties, never did any alcohol, never did drugs, looked after my body. The idea that something was wrong with it. I mean, it was me that, as a result of a hernia that I have no memory of because it happened at age 1. That's why I can't have children. So that was a big shock that, all the care I've looked after my body. Oh my God, there's something wrong. And that's something pretty fundamentally wrong. And then, when 5 years passed and all the money, all the emotion up and down and, all the, just heart wrenching and, ups and downs that went along over that 5 years. And then you realize, well, due to circumstances I have, no control over, no influence whatsoever, it's ripped away. And it wasn't because I gave up, but, in a sense, I felt like I had to give up. And that really ate away at me for a little while. And, most important, not because I felt that I had to give up. I mean, that's the analogy I give as a triathlete about, never give up and all of a sudden you're forced to give up. Obviously, I mean, it was the grief from thinking you're going to be a dad and thinking my wife's going to be a mom, and well, that's not going to happen. And well, as I described in my book, I was in an ultra marathon and it just fell apart. And that was the first race I ever couldn't finish. And so it's hard to say if that was kind of fated or something like that. I mean, I don't really believe in, I don't know. I don't want to talk about the structure of the universe, but I don't know what to make of it. But I mean, it was in retrospect, strangely appropriate and tragic at the same time that the first race I ever couldn't finish happened just almost directly after the first thing in my life that I found I couldn't finish. I couldn't get to the finish line of adoption. And I don't necessarily want to talk about having children as a finish line, but as a triathlete, it's just an appropriate analogy in this case. But it was really hard work. And I just had this absolute meltdown out on the course of a ultra marathon where, not only was I grieving the loss of children and that I never had, and, I'd sold my business. We were literally moving interstate, and I did this race en route moving interstate. And then 2 days before I came down with the flu, and I was standing at the start line, absolutely broken. 98% of that was over the adoption, and the rest of the other circumstances were thrown on top of that. And it was literally a case of I can't actually even move my body by the time I ran 50K, and it was a 100K race. And I had a meltdown at the aid station where I literally toppled over and literally couldn't move. And the very, very kind volunteers, this is in the Blue Mountains of Australia, just outside of Sydney, they were looking after me. And I assumed they thought I was having a meltdown because I, didn't finish the race, but it had nothing to do with that. And that was the first time in all my years as an endurance athlete that I didn't care about the race. And in many ways, that helped me become a bit more realistic about, my attitude of never give up. I mean, I guess you could say it seems admirable in some way to say you never give up, but then you sort of realize there are times where giving up and moving on and leaving something behind is actually appropriate, even if it's painful. And I guess that's what that chapter of my life was about, was figuring out when is it appropriate to, move on, and even if you didn't get what you wanted. And yeah.
That comes up so often, I think, in the conversations that I think we have on the podcast from our listeners, life. Actually, I don't know about the three of you, but certainly when I've started to speak a bit more about my journey, one of the things I frequently get asked is, how do you know when to stop? And what came across it's you're a fantastic storyteller. I just want to say that first and foremost. I do an awful lot of books. You're welcome. An awful lot of books in self-publishing in that area. I help an awful lot of authors out in my other hat, and varying degrees of success with how they write. You are an absolutely incredible storyteller, I think, just as a guest here, but also it's just such an absorbing book. I genuinely mean that. I have sat and just read the book and have gone, oh my goodness, I really need to turn the light out and go to sleep now. And I think what comes across from it is yes, there's this incredible story of the endurance. And I think for me, it came across very vividly that as someone who is fascinated by a triathlete, but would never be a triathlete. There's no way, physically or in any other form. But it's the sense of joy that you get from that, but also that there was never any kind of sort of, I think people think that maybe there's some kind of light bulb moment, some big revelation, where, I don't know, maybe something godly happens, I don't know, where you suddenly think, oh, this is this epiphany, and I am no longer this person, I am this person. And I think that came across very much in your writing, that it's a gradual thing, isn't it? It's not sort of some great epiphany. And as you say, life circumstances way beyond control can often affect the outcome of things that we thought that we could control.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of arrived at the conclusion that you don't control anything. You mean you have influence, and I mean, when I talk about, when I've talked about this through, and I don't know that I can articulate it just off the top of my head very well, but I've heard talks and had conversations with people about not having control, and the argument against that sometimes is, well, if you don't have any control, well, why bother doing anything? And I mean, I do think we have influence over outcomes to a certain extent, because if you don't do anything, nothing is going to happen. But you don't control, from an endurance sport perspective, you don't control your genetics. So I mean, you don't control whether you're going to be an Olympic caliber athlete, for example, or someone who does this because they just really, really enjoy it. The whole, you mentioned the word epiphany. I mean, I just remember you saying that, and I've had many, I guess you could call epiphanies out either on swimming, cycling, or running. And some of them have been in races, some of them have been, just out in the middle of the mountains, or some of them have been in lakes, and definitely in rivers. Most notably the Buller River and the Clutha River, where I was like, really, wow, this is like a journey in my life. And I wanted to quote this song in my book, but as I was writing and getting close to ready to publish, I found out you're not actually allowed to quote song lyrics without the permission from the artist. And Garth Brooks is and I couldn't get a hold of Garth Brooks. Well, I mean, I did email him, but I assume his agent didn't answer me. I don't think Garth himself got the email. But there's his song that he sang that was really popular when I was a teenager, and it resonated with me way back then. I'm pretty sure I was 17 at the time I first heard it, and one of the chorus is, one of the lines is, don't you sit upon the shorelines and say you're satisfied, choose to chance the rapids and dare to dance the tide. And that really resonated with me as a teenager, and I thought that's a pretty cool way to live your life. And then fast forward 30 something years, and I was in the Clutha River actually literally doing that, as well as metaphorically doing it. And that's shame I couldn't quote it in the book, but Garth's agent never emailed me back, so I couldn't get permissions to quote it. So
How rude.
yeah.
Right, it happens with the best of publishers. Penguin, lots of them they get rejected, so I don't think it's personal.
So if Garth Brooks ever listens to this podcast, I don't take it personally. I think he might have given permission if he'd known.
We'll pass on his best wishes. I'm sure he does.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob, can I take you back to the Blue Mountains and when you had your meltdown?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know why it was happening, or did you have to go on a journey of self-discovery? Now, I have to be open here and say that I have not read your book yet. The other girls have been very studious. I haven't. I'm lazy.
Yep.
But I'm interested to know. Yeah. Did you know at that time what it was, or did you have to go on a sort of journey of discovery to work out what it was that made you melt down?
Well, I knew. Well, I mean, take out the childlessness aspect of it for a moment. If you're moving it, basically what happened was before I knew that the adoption was going to be shut down, I booked to do this race, and the original plan was I was going to fly over from Adelaide, where I was at the time. My wife's uncle actually lives in the Blue Mountains, so I was going to stay there, go do the race, and it was going to be like a several day holiday. Take out the childlessness and the failed adoption, having forced to pull the plug just very, very short time before that. I sold my business, which came about actually after we pulled the plug on adoption. Well, the plug was pulled on us, I should say. But if you're moving interstate and you're en route, after selling a business and trying to move into a new home, literally homeless at the time, and then come down with the flu, that's not the best time to run an ultra marathon. But then when you throw in the enormous grief that I was feeling, and in retrospect, what had happened was the plug was pulled on adoption, and then very shortly after, just I don't know if it was coincidentally or fate intervened, we had this job offer in Brisbane. I thought, okay, we'll take that because we wanted to be closer to my wife's family, and my wife's sister has 2 young boys, and we thought, okay, I'll be cool aunt and uncle. And so we went through the process of, the very stressful process of selling my business. And then of course, preparing to move interstate, which is stressful at the best of times. But what had happened was I didn't deal with the grief of, in a perfect world, I would have taken a time out, not run an ultra marathon and not sold my business and not moved interstate and taken some time, I don't know, take a tropical vacation or something and just deal with not having children. But that's not what I did. And that's, in retrospect, that was, I'm not going to say stupid. I think it's what I had to do at the time. But it's not what I'd recommend to anyone going through the journey, put it that way. But yeah, I just went in keep going mode, keep going. And that's probably the triathlete in me. And my wife, she's not a triathlete, but she's into hiking and cycle touring. So she's no slouch about keeping going either. And so I was on the start line utterly broken. And I remember thinking on the start line, I was like, okay, what this run is going to be about is I'm going to power through this and just going to find the inner strength that I didn't, even deeper, dig deep, and I'm going to have some kind of revelation out there. And I kind of planned to have some kind of revelation. But I was on the start line, like I say, grieving badly and stressed from moving, homeless, and with the flu. And I didn't stand a chance. I'm actually amazed in retrospect, I made it 50 kilometers. And so I think the idea of planning to have some kind of revelation was, it wasn't the right mindset to go in. You can never plan to have one, but that's what I had hoped would happen. I don't want to say I planned a revelation. I'd kind of hoped something would come to me while I was out there. And I guess what ended up coming to me, I guess the best way of saying it is, I learned that as a triathlete who'd never given up, that sometimes, it is okay to just I don't like the word give up, but sometimes you just have to know when is the appropriate time to quit? When is the appropriate time to grieve? When is the appropriate time to not be strong and grieve? And you can't stay like that forever, of course. Well, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, we're all human, and everyone has their breaking point, and I found mine, and I think that was valuable in itself. So that's what that Ultraman marathon did for me, is not finishing this race, and realizing that I wasn't unbreakable. I mean, endurance athletes throw unbreakable and similar words around a lot, and I don't believe anyone's unbreakable. And that was the day I found out that I wasn't. So, yeah, did I answer your question? I'm not 100% sure I did.
I'll give you the context of my question. So, for me, as an example, I was in this really weird state that I didn't know what was going on, and then I had to go on a journey of discovery to sort of work out, okay, I'm grieving here, and there are other issues in life, and I just wanted to get your take on that. If that was that journey of was it sometime afterwards when you was able to pick it apart and go, right? Because I mean, I guess you've actually answered that question, where you picked it apart and went, well, I did this, there was this happening, there was this happening, this was happening, and it wasn't a great combination. So yes,
no.
In short, yeah, you did.
And one thing I'd add is like, when I was grieving, what came on my mind when I was at this aid station, approximately halfway through this 100-kilometer run, when I was waiting for my wife to come get me, I actually felt guilty about grieving, because I've known people who've lost children they've had, and it just came on my mind, like, that I'm grieving the loss of children that I never had, and in one way or another, I was comparing my grief to the grief of actually losing a child, and then I started to feel guilty about that, because I didn't know that I had the right to feel that kind of grief about children that I never had, and I didn't, and I don't know if I still know the answer to that. That's what I felt, and I didn't articulate that for a long time. I actually, the only person I ever told that to before I wrote my book was my wife, and it was just one of those things that it took me a while to, not be beating myself up, as like, I guess it'd be fair to say one of the worst things that could happen to a human being is losing their child. And well, I never had that. And, but, I mean, I thought that I would, and then that was ripped away. And then, like I say, that's what I was feeling. And I was not only wrestling with that grief, but then I was beating myself up for grieving. And you shouldn't feel this grief because you didn't lose a child. And then I was like, well, did I, didn't I? And I just, it was just a self-destructive day. The whole day was self-destructive in retrospect. I shouldn't have been at the start line. I should have had sense enough to pull the pin. But I didn't. So valuable lessons were learned. And like I said, I don't know that I still answered the question, did I have the right to feel that grief, comparing it to children that had been lost by parents, but that's what I was feeling. So I just allowed myself to feel pain. And, triathletes like a certain kind of pain, but that wasn't pain I liked. And it took a long time to pick myself up after that one. But I guess the framework and structure and discipline of triathlon was one of the many things, and that helped me keep going. And of course, most importantly, having a loving relationship with my wife, and those two things, you get up and keep going. And it was a rough time.
Yeah,
I can certainly appreciate that.
I think we all can. I think we've all been there, haven't we, in various ways? Even our listeners are probably chiming with a lot with what you say, where you sort of go, should I feel this grief? can I measure it against other people's grief? Should I be measuring it against other people's grief? I think it's very hard to contextualize it when we don't talk about it, do we?
Yeah, I mean, there's a time for comparison, and and these days with social media, comparison is often gets too much out of control. And I mean, I don't know that I have the right answer for what grief can you compare it to, and whether or not you should. I just would, like I say, as someone who used to think, in retrospect, I guess arrogantly. I don't think I'm an arrogant person by nature, but the thought that I was unbreakable, in retrospect, if you pick it apart, there's some level of arrogance in that. And then to find out that I wasn't, and then just to absolutely feel this grief and be basically on the ground, unable to even pick yourself up. There was value in that day. And like I say, I mean, I do think at some point, no matter what's going on, you do have to pick yourself up. And fortunately I did and kept going. But you just didn't end up with the life that I thought I was going to have. And then you learn to make peace with that. And, and then eventually, well, I lived in Queensland for a while, then we lived to Singapore for a year, and then we're now living in New Zealand and now having a different kind of adventure. And my wife's become a writer, and I'd always had it in mind from a very young age, from the time I was 20 odd years old. I think, I'll write a book about endurance sport, but it just didn't happen. And then swam the Clutha, and then a month later, the COVID lockdown happened. I thought, I got time to write a book. So that's what I started during that very weird time that we're not 100% out of yet.
Yeah. I'm curious. So you've sort of said you've come out of it. Was the Clutha River part of that, or because you were going to do the Straits of Gibraltar, weren't you? And you sort of said, it didn't pan out either. But then you went, right,
yeah,
Clutha River, I'm doing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Strait of Gibraltar didn't happen for reasons beyond my control. And then that was another blow, because that was kind of what I thought was my dream swim. And then, swimming was supposed to be, if people read my book, I mean, I had in my mind that swimming and triathlon was the one thing supposed to be, in my mind, the one thing no one could ever tell me, no, you can't do it. And someone told me, no, you can't do it. And then, it took me my wife and I planned this before the attempt at the Strait, where we went cycle touring around Italy for a little over a month before moving to New Zealand. And it was around Italy that I was like, made peace with that. And then moved to New Zealand. And river swimming, marathon swimming, I thought maybe I'm just not meant to be doing this. Because a lot of the marathon swims, like, for example, the English Channel, the Strait of Gibraltar, the Cook Strait here in New Zealand, swimming, you might think that's a pretty cheap sport. And if you just do it in the pool, well, it's reasonably cheap. But, to swim the Cook Strait, a one-day swim, that would take me approximately 9 hours, would cost me $6,500 just to get the permit. Then, of course, the travel. I mean, obviously, it's not that expensive travel given that I'm in New Zealand. But, my wife, a very wise woman. I really, really married the right woman on so many levels. But we were at this lake. It was winter. So, I mean, in New Zealand in winter, you don't swim across the lakes down here. It is too cold to do a marathon swim in anyway. Lake Tekapo, we were standing in front of this lake, our first vacation to that area since we moved there. And she said, look, if you were to swim across that beautiful lake in summer, would you really have a worse time than if you were swimming across one of these really expensive swims like the English Channel or the Cook Strait or anything else? And, all it would cost is, you'd buy your kayak supporter a pizza and, you'd stay in a hotel room and, would you have a worse time? And turns out she was right. So what I really adopted in my mindset was, I get to do all these marathon swims in some of the most beautiful locations you could ever imagine. I just mentioned Milford Sound. I just paid the support boat captain for the fuel and, bought my kayak support team pizzas and swam in Milford Sound, that's probably the most beautiful spot in the world I could ever imagine swimming. And, swimming the Clutha, that was a small fraction of the cost of doing the Strait, the Cook Strait or the Strait of Gibraltar. And then turns out, well, I really, really like river swimming even more. And there's no organized river swims because very few people are idiotic enough to swim down these big rivers. So you just do it yourself. So it just became, I've always had this sort of thing where I like doing things that not very many people do. And when I started doing triathlons, it was a relatively new sport. It was kind of, well, that's what the weirdos do. So I like being the weirdo. And well, more people do triathlon now. And now I'm doing different types of triathlon based adventures. And I still compete in the odd triathlon, but just have more adventures than I used to. I'm not so much focused on racing.
I think you dodged a bullet anyway there, Rob, because I've heard a whisper, like you saw it on the TV show, that there's a lot of muck that comes out of the through the Straits of Gibraltar from the Mediterranean into the Atlantic. So yep. I'm sure the Clutha or the lake in New Zealand will be much more cleaner.
Well, that's definitely true. New Zealand, one of the things we're blessed with is, it's a lot cleaner. Our lakes, rivers, and the oceans around here are very, very clean. And like one of the reasons I decided against the English Channel for a while was, people who swim the English Channel, they count swimming through mile-long oil slicks, and then peeing out oil for 5 or 6 days afterwards. And that's not something I like to do. And I've seen people do marathon swims through pretty polluted bodies of water, but I like pristine bodies of water. So it's a lot more fun. And so I'm really happy making up my own adventures. And because I make up my own adventures, I don't have to pay anyone to do them. And you get to do a lot more of them.
What's the best bit then? Is it the build up to it, the beginning, or the middle, or the end? Which is the best bit that what's the bit that keeps you going? Because these are huge, aren't they?
For me, it was a challenge. I mean, if you've read my book, I got myself into some pretty crazy situations where, you just like, how the heck did that happen? Like my thing in Mongolia where I thought I was going to get squashed by wrestlers, and my fiasco in the Montreal airport after the national championships, you're like, oh my God, how did that happen? So I've had a bit of a knack for getting myself into some, pretty idiotic or in retrospect, very comedic situations. So planning the expedition to the Clutha, I mean, it's important to know, like in a river swim, especially a big river swim, it's not as simple as just get in the water and go for it. All the safety planning, all the logistics, all the, there's just so much that went into it. And I think because I just had a triathlon background and I developed over the years, I know what I'm doing when I'm training for a triathlon. Planning the logistics of such a big adventure was something and something that had never actually been done. That was really satisfying. I wouldn't say I enjoy that as much as the swim, but it was satisfying to figure out that I could do it and come out the other end and still have everything intact. But it is the swim itself. Like, I talk about in my book how in still water swimming in the ocean or in a lake, you get into this meditative state, but in river swimming, when you're going through the rapids, you really got to be present time conscious. And, the ability to get into, often what people call the zone, I like to think of it as swimming meditation. That's valuable. And, I do yoga, and I do see the value in traditional meditation of just sitting there and getting into a good state. But despite many, 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 many years of practice, if I sit there and try to meditate, I just end up thinking about some, Darth Vader or Homer Simpson or something stupid. It just doesn't work for me. And if you can do it, good on you. I wish I could too. But I get into that state in open water swimming. But in river swimming, it's different because you really got to be ready for the next sprint to get around a corner, swim through the rapids. And when you're swimming through rapids, it's all about absolute present time consciousness. There's nothing else other than what's going on right now. And I really like that aspect of it as well. In addition to not feeling you have any control, you're going with the flow, but you have a unique skill set to navigate this rapids. And And, then of course, a river can be compared to life on so many levels, because there's calm bits. Parts of the Clutha are really calm, almost like swimming in a lake. But, get a little bit further upstream, well, storm's coming, sailors say something to the effect of, life is like the ocean. You're smooth sailing one day and you're crashing on the rocks the next. Well, in a river, you're going through smooth bits where you can just kind of, cruise along and really enjoy the ride. And then all of a sudden, well, geez, you got to sprint, get around corners, dodge rocks, and really have a lot of trust in your support team, because they're the ones that were telling me, yep, get ready to sprint. There's a turn coming up, go to the river left, go to the river right. And you just have to have trust in what they're saying, and trusting people and putting your trust in the right people. And yeah, there's just so many levels of river swimming that I found as a metaphor for life. And yeah, and the aspect of no control is just one of those things that became really important to me after accepting childlessness.
You speak in the book about control, and one of the bits I found most fascinating that I think not many people talk about actually was you talked about the cost of things, how much it costs you to do things. And I wanted just to read one thing, which was that you say that I have been so paralyzed by the fear of going bankrupt that I often went weeks without looking at the bank account. After a long hike one day, Tansy and I decided I'd confront those fears. And you go on to talk about confronting those fears. It's this, but you cover so many things by simply, I keep going back to storytelling, but actually you're breaking so many taboos, because I also put on the Full Stop podcast social media, and actually it was my own social media, how I was reading the book, recommended it to everybody, because actually you're busting a lot of myths. One is about adoption is easy, as we've all heard. Absolutely, you completely upend anyone's sense of reason for that. We all know that, but often not through our own lived experiences. You talk about it so openly that I think even I had learned something from you, and I thought I knew enough, having tentatively looked around the edges at this ourselves. I learned a lot more from you. So thank you for that. But also you talk about money, and you talk about the worry of that. No one talks about that either, do they, really? And you go into detail.
Well, I think my fear of money that I developed in my 30s, well, I wouldn't say I developed in my 30s. I became more aware of my fear in my 30s. Like I don't know how in retrospect I got through college, because I was a part-time lifeguard and part-time swim instructor and on heavy student loans. And I have no idea how I managed to feed myself and do triathlons. In college, in retrospect, it doesn't make any financial sense, but that aside, my fear of going bankrupt stemmed from, the mess that followed my parents' divorce when I was a teenager. My father drank away my college fund and everything else that we had, and not just mine, but my sister's, and my mother, who's a school teacher. So, we were reasonably well off, but certainly by no means wealthy. She was in serious financial strife for quite a few years after all of that. And, so then after I finally paid off my student loans, and then, having all these expenses adding up for a 5-year adoption process that ultimately didn't give us any children. I've joked, I've basically sent kids to college financially, but haven't got any kids. I found confronting that fear finally quite liberating. And, that's why I chose to include that in the book, because it was something that was paralyzing me. And then again, I thought I was taking control, but, it was just ultimately a lesson I needed to learn, is sound financial management. And I compared it in the book to triathlon. I got to a certain stage where, yes, I'd made it to the world championships in triathlon, but, kind of realized, well, probably not going to be the world champion. And I thought, when I started confronting my fear of money, I was like, okay, well, I'm probably never going to become I think I said the next Warren Buffett, iconic wealthy man. I'm never going to not likely, I should say, to become a billionaire. But if I, manage this properly and put some discipline into it, well, I, at least I can, keep my head above water and, try to thrive. And that's, been doing that with similar discipline to triathlon for many years now. So it's, that's not an invitation to, for any kidnappers who might take my wife for ransom, I mean, like they won't get wealthy doing that, but
I love that part of the book. That made me laugh.
yeah. I mean,
you call it the kidnapping fund. Yeah, the absolute savings, they're not touchable unless paying kidnappers for Tansy's ransom is what.
Yeah, I mean, Tansy and I have joked that, I mean, if I get kidnapped, I got to escape on my own. She won't pay the ransom, but if she gets kidnapped, she should try to escape. But if she can't, I'll pay it.
That's always a handy thing to have in a marriage, I think. I've got one of those agreements, but maybe that's good. Yeah. Okay.
That's a joke. But I mean, we were just sick of being after the adoption process fell apart. We were just sick of being in financial strife. So we just really had to tackle it head on, and off we went. So,
and I think that's interesting too, that you talk about, the adoption costs money. People forget that. They don't realize. I mean, like lots of things cost money. IVF costs money. Goodness, I know that one. But adoption costs a lot of money. It really does. I was astounded by the figures that you write, but it's true. It's another area that people don't know about.
It was just one of those things that, it always felt like, after a few years of it going on, it's just like every now and then, I get it in my head, I wanted to do the Strait of Gibraltar. I'd start saving up for that. But then you get a call from the agency saying, oh, you got a $2,000 bill for this or a $1,500 bill for that. And then, there was a time I was trying to save up for a new bike, and I was like, okay, I've actually almost got the money here. Oh, no, I don't. I'm giving that to the adoption department. So I mean, I always reconciled it in my head. It's like, well, I want kids more than I want a new bike, but it's over 5 years, it wears you down. And like I say, it was pulled apart from us, not because we gave up, but in some sense, it was almost even fortunate that it was pulled away from us, because we couldn't afford it anymore. So. And I think it is important for anyone who's considering adoption or something like that they do know it's just not something that's given away. I mean, it's just, it's a lot of money.
It's a real tangible response to, why don't you just adopt, isn't it? It's like, well, actually, there's a bit more to it. Yeah.
So, I mean, and as a 40-something-year-old man, I mean, people tend to ask me, if I meet them for a new time and, living in a new country. Well, I mean, I've been here 4 years now, but I'm still meeting lots of people. I mean, the question is put to me is like, how many kids do you have? Not do you have children? And, so there's that. And, and if I say I don't have children, like, well, most people don't pry into your business, but you meet some people who don't have any, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have that sense of like, maybe I shouldn't ask this person until I know them a bit better. But it's well, why don't you? And then I'll say, sometimes if I'm not in the mood to talk about it, and if I don't feel comfortable with that, or if I don't feel comfortable with that person, it's like, it just never happened for us. And then you try to change the subject, but sometimes people are pushy, and then now I just say, that's such a long story. I invite you to read my book.
Nice.
I'll tell people who I'm becoming friends with. Like if I'm actually interested in becoming friends with a person who I'm talking to who's new, who doesn't know my story. Like if I like this person and I feel comfortable with them, and like it's not the first thing that we're talking about. Like I mean, if I've gotten to know them and like. I make a lot of new friends somewhat regularly, because I live in a relatively new country, but if someone just randomly just starts asking me how many children I have, I don't dive into the story, but if they're a bit pushy and I don't really want to talk about it, I say, hey, if you really, really want to know, I don't say it like that. That sounded rude. Like if you are genuinely interested in why I don't have children, I did write this book, and it really helped me reconcile why I don't. But now and again, someone is kind of rude. So I guess I won't say I've never been rude about it, but like just it very coincidentally, well, maybe it's not a coincidence, I don't know. Two of my patients as a chiropractor, one of them is 6 months pregnant. I hadn't seen her for a little while, and she showed up again at my office with some back pain, and she said she was 6 months pregnant. And she said she didn't want to be, and she'd read my book, and she offered me her child. She was, I wouldn't say joking, but she wasn't being serious.
Mm-hmm.
But she was like, oh, I know you don't have kids and you would like to have them. Do you want this one? Because I don't really know that I do. And it was awkward to change the subject to, so tell me about your back pain and how I can help you with that. It was a weird moment. And
I'm so sorry. That is just awful. That's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, and like, sometimes when, I see parents going through the daily grind of raising a kid and all that sort of thing. I mean, like, I'm sure the same thing would have happened to me if I was in the grocery store with a screaming 3-year-old and, you feel like punting them across the vegetable aisle. You all, we're all familiar with that sort of thing, but, you see that sort of thing happen. And now and again you do think, oh, geez, well, I don't have to deal with that. But then you catch myself thinking that, like, actually, I really would have loved to deal with that. And try to figure out how to guide a kid through not throwing tantrums and helping them grow up to be a well-adjusted person. Obviously, when you're going through all of those things, now and again, you just reach the end of your rope and you don't want to deal with it. But like I've had it said to me a number of times where, like, as a 40-something, it's like, oh, it must be so awesome to have the freedom of not having children. And I said to people, well, yeah, I'm actually very content. I am 95% good with not having children. I've reached that point. I'll never be fully good with it. But, I do enjoy my life. I do enjoy the things that I do. The things that I do are not just filler. I always look forward to, for example, learning how to be a triathlete with a kid, and not necessarily molding a kid into a triathlete, but I always imagined doing push-ups with a 5-year-old on my back, or pulling one of those cycle carts behind my bike, and pulling a kid on my bike, and then figuring out what they want, and once they started showing interest in whatever they show interest in, my mother was really good at feeding whatever habit that I had. And I always thought that's a pretty good lesson to try to pass on. So I always wanted to do that. So, I always try to see beyond, if you see a kid having a tantrum and a parent trying to hold it together and not lose their temper, that has to be hard. It's got to be frustrating, but it's a frustration that I would have liked to have had. And like I say, I mean, it's very strange. In the last few weeks, 2 different women have offered me a baby, one that has been born and one that has not been born. And one had read my book, one hadn't. But I have another patient who she has an 18-month-old who she was having a hard time with, and she said, oh God, do you just want to take him home? And I was like, yeah. She didn't know my story, but it's hard to know what to say in response to that.
God, yeah, it's just such a
Very
trigger,
cool.
isn't it? It's just what do you say? I mean, what happens if you say, yeah, all right then? If you're feeling like devil may care, just think, well, yeah, all right then.
I have said that actually, Sarah, to somebody. There's a look of horror on the other person's face. I've actually said, yes, okay, I can do that. And obviously I would not, but the horror is then, and it catches narrative because it's insulting to you. It's actually, it devalues their own agony and that of every parent going. So it's the devaluation of that and trying to get rid of that, the source of that, but it devalues the child, that poor child as well.
Yeah.
And at the end of the tether, but understand that part. But when you actually turn around and go, yeah, okay, it's then the thought that, oh God, you're not actually good enough to take the child. Oh my God. Well, I kind of thinking that maybe, that whole thing of being, I was talking about it yesterday, about it was in a meditation class. Ironically, Rob, I do meditate, but anyway, it was
I wish I could.
I know. That's all right. I can't swim at the river, don't worry. I wouldn't even try. I was talking to Bindi Shah, who's been on the podcast before, and we were talking about it was about kind of owning your own sort of fears, but also about being judged as well. And I talked about how I call it the Legoland thing. So in the UK here, there is Legoland Park, and I don't know if this is still true, a listener will probably tell us, but as far as I understand, a few years ago, they wouldn't let you into the park unless you had a child with you. You weren't allowed in. And at the time, I was livid. I was just like, how dare you create this thing? Now I kind of think, well, actually, no, you don't get my money. I'll go and spend it somewhere more interesting, because who the hell wants to go to Legoland, when you've got, lots of beautiful natural places to look at? Why do I want to do that? And I kind of, we're riffing about how it's okay to then take a child from outside the perimeter of Legoland to get in, but you can't do it in the park, apparently. You can't nick a child there either. And it's so... Oh, it makes me so angry. It's probably the thing I find more angry making than anything else, to be offered that, because adoption, IVF, you can forgive the fact that people may not understand that, or in fact, many of the reasons why our listeners, and we are all childless, not by choice, they can be complicated and not talked about. But actually, to turn around and offer a child to somebody who isn't a parent, and you might not know why, or you may know why, worse when they know why, is disrespectful on every single level. I mean,
and something else that somewhat recently happened. We had an attempted break-in at my office. They tried to break down the front door. They didn't get in. They severely damaged the front door, but they didn't actually get in. And anyway, we got there the next day, and it's like, okay, well, we got to replace the door. And anyway, we got the door replaced, and one of the girls who works with me, she had the only key. We hadn't made the copies of the key for the new door yet. And she accidentally, had the key in her pocket. She went off, she got off early before I did, and the other staff member. And, she didn't realize she had the key in her pocket. So we had to call her when we were finished and said, can you come back? And, the other person I work with, she doesn't work there anymore now, but she said, I was going to offer to wait for her to come back. I was going to say, you just go on. But before I had a chance to say that, she said, I've got plans for my kids, so I can't be the one to stay. And I just thought, okay, I'm not going to say anything, but maybe I should have. But, I had plans too. They just don't have to involve kids. So I'll just be late for what I was going to do. But you go on. Thanks for that. It was one of those days where just childlessness wasn't even on my mind. I wasn't even thinking about it. But, as I was waiting for, to get the key, just like, okay, well, are my non-childless plans invaluable? It was just one of those kind of reminders that, it's been said to me a number of times, when we're trying to figure out who does what work, it's like, well, you can do it. You don't have kids to think about, so, you can do the extra mile. And so, well, just because I don't have children doesn't mean I want to live at the office. I do really enjoy my work, but I don't want to live here. I want to do other stuff. So, so there's that. But, so, yeah.
Infuriating.
And if nothing else, your book just proves so much that you are so much more than childlessness. You are just there's so many things that you do and so many aspects to your life that I'd be kind of worried keeping you for some kind of extreme running thing or something.
Well, it's been said to me, I just want to touch on one thing before I just answer that is just, you said the word angry, and I was like, like every now and then, of course, you get angry about anything. I mean, we're all human. We have the full range of emotions, but I've just been a kind of weird in the sense that like all my life, I've actually been terrible at being angry, even when I am arguably justified to get angry about something. I'm just not that good at being angry. Anytime I have been, I tend to shut down or just go away. I don't tend to, I'm just not an aggressive person, I guess is one way of saying it. But I obviously feel irritation or feel sadness sometimes about those sorts of comments. But I mean, I don't see the value in, if you do get angry, I just don't feel the value in staying angry about it. Like if you, I don't know, in this, it's probably always been true, but it's more obvious or more apparent in this era where people want to create some kind of societal change. They say the key is to get angry about it, and I don't know that that's true. So I've just been comfortable, I guess, which is somewhat unusual as a man, accepting some emotions, allowing myself to feel it, and then just, and then just move on. And usually the moving on process for me just happens to be involving a swim or a run or a bike ride. Mm. And then you work through it. And, all this extreme running and extreme swimming that I've done, I mean, it's been said to me no shortage of times, even long before I knew about being childless. I mean, obviously I've always been childless, but, before I knew before being a father was even thought about, you have problems and all you're trying to do is run or swim away from them. And I just have never believed that. I always thought that, it was one of the healthy tools to deal with any problem as well as experience joy. So, sometimes you are literally running away from a problem. Sometimes you're running with it, and sometimes you're running towards something. And I've always found that line of thinking valuable as an endurance athlete. And, all this running and all this swimming that I do, I mean, it's been said to me by certain people, it's just filler, because what else are you going to do? But to me, it's not. So I've thought that through. I wondered, is there any merit to that? But I mean, I've really come to the conclusion that, this sort of thing is what I've always liked to do, and, hopefully will always like to do. And if I find out I'm not enjoying it anymore, I'll think of something else. And that's one of the reasons I took up writing. I always was a creative little kid and lost touch with that as an adult. So yeah, I wanted to be a writer, and no illusions about being a New York Times bestseller, but thought, well, I want to write a book. And I set a joke goal for myself of I want 7 people not named my mother to read it, 8 including mom, and did better than that. So so I found value in that as well. So I like to do things for the value and the challenge and the joy of it, not necessarily to be the best at something. And in the community that I've been a part of, for some reason, I found this more so when I lived in Brisbane than anywhere else. People have said to me, well, what's the point in doing something if you're not going to be the best at it? Like I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like macho, really blokey way of putting it is like, if you're not going to be the best, don't even show up, or, if you can't win, don't play, or, some variation of that. And, I guess in addition to the childlessness message and learning, when's the right time to give up or move on and realize this isn't the right thing to be fighting for. There's value in doing what you enjoy, even if you're not going to be the best. So I found that in my triathlon. I found that in, we talked about my money management. I'm not going to be a billionaire, but value in managing money well. And I found value in being a writer, even though I'm under no illusions of, being on the Oprah Winfrey show or being a New York Times bestseller. I found value in doing it. It was very therapeutic, and it felt to me like finishing a big triathlon, very.
I took a lot from that, actually, from that part of both your conversation just now, but also just throughout the reading your words as well, because and I actually want to go back to something you said before about how you had imagined having a trailer on your bike with a child in it. And one of the things I started doing last month was getting back in touch with my inner artist. So this course that I told my dad about this, and I said it's called Find Your Joy, and he went, oh, and I went, yeah, don't judge, but it's all about finding your joy in art and going back to something that I used to do, but I lost my way with it and literally just stopped dead with it, because I had the idea in my head, so ingrained in my head, that of course I'd get all the paints out and I'd muck around with my child. And so I couldn't do it anymore. I stopped. And actually, it's a fundamentally huge part of my life, massive part of my life, and where I was heading before I became a designer. And I got sidetracked by that and this thing called the Full Stop podcast. And it's really interesting to kind of to parallel that with your words, and kind of going back and uncovering what we all might, perhaps something deep inside us that we might be, that gets stuck because of the grief that we are going through, this disenfranchised grief that we feel, but also I think as well, not being the best, as you say, at something. I'm never going to be on the walls of the Tate Gallery, but there's always that kind of thing where you think, oh, maybe that competitiveness that we all have in life, that I'm sure is somewhere tangled up with kind of pronatalism as well. That, this idea of parents that put their pictures up on social media and it's all so perfect, and actually everything is imperfect and nobody's the best at anything. How do you measure best? No one can measure.
Yeah,
really.
well, I mean, in the sporting context, it's a bit easier to measure the best, because the first person to cross the line at the Olympics is, generally speaking, the best. But even if they get to that point, it's such a common story among athletes. Like, you're the best for a very finite amount of time. Once you're not, there's so many athletes that sink into some kind of depression or have, go off the rails in one way or another. Not everybody, of course, but it's a very common story that, you go from Olympic medal to, some way of really being lost once you are not the best at something. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, I mean, obviously, it's at a certain point, when no matter how hard you push, someone is going to beat you. It's, purely in the sporting context. And I mean, most other areas of life, I mean, obviously the best can be quite subjective. But I mean, that became very apparent to me, when I was living in Brisbane. I mean, I got it in my head, I wanted to go to Bhutan. I always wanted to see that country as the country I most wanted to visit. And I was going tramping there. We used to call it trekking, but here in New Zealand, we call it tramping. So I'll be patriotic for my, my new countrymen. But the highest we were going to get to was 5,500 meters. And, someone that I'd been training with had said to me, well, why would you only go to 5,500 meters in the Himalayas when there's Mount Everest not that far away from Bhutan? Why don't you aim to climb that? And, I do see the value in doing something along the lines of climbing Everest. I mean, I'm not a mountaineer, I'm a triathlete, but I just found that really sad. I mean, he didn't see the value in seeing the beautiful Himalayas of Bhutan and the culture associated with that very, very unique and isolated country. All he could see was, well, that's not the highest you could go, so why would you even bother? And I've really made, I like I say, I try to get across in my book, there's value in, whether it's a marathon swimmer, triathlon, artwork, reading a book, playing a musical instrument, whatever it is that lights you up, there's value in doing it. And it doesn't have to be the thing you do to make a living. I mean, I just think that it's important for everyone to have something in their life that really lights them up, and, something that really makes you go, that's pretty cool. I really like doing that. And, for me, obviously it's triathlon and marathon swimming, and now writing, and a few other things as well. And, having some kind of joyful activity is important, whether you're childless or not. And, so that's one of the many things that have, got me out to the other side where, like I say, 99% of the time I'm good with it. Now and again, anything that's, it's not unique to childlessness. If you've ever experienced any form of grief or trauma, now and again, something creeps up where it bothers you, but I've learned to move through it really, I won't say really well. In my mind, I think I moved through it mostly really well. But that took a while.
I think did for all of us. I was going to ask you, so obviously the book finishes with Swimming the Clutha. What have you got coming up? What future plans have you got coming up then? Because you say I'm still doing triathlons, I'm still doing the swims. What other plans have you got?
There's a lot of them. Because I wrote the book and I've got connected with a number of many of whom I have known throughout my life and the places I've been. But I made a YouTube documentary of my Clutha River swim, and I emphasize it's a homemade documentary, not a Netflix-worthy documentary, just on the GoPro footage that we took. But like an American swimmer who saw my documentary, he's in Utah and he wants to organize a big river swim through the Canyonlands in Utah, and I've never been there. And I thought, well, if he wants to invite me to swim through Canyonlands in Utah because he watched my documentary, that's something I want to do. And there's a multi-day triathlon that I'm going to organize, also based partly in the Clutha. The upper Clutha, which had some of the strongest rapids, I want to organize a 6 or 7 day triathlon down in the town of Wanaka, where I swim the Clutha and then run some of the mountains and do some of the mountain biking around there and some road cycling and cycle touring, and just swim across Lake Wanaka and swim, the neighboring lake. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. It begins with H, and I can never remember how to say it. There's a lake directly next to Lake Wanaka, and 2 really beautiful mountain peaks that are just directly next to those lakes that will run around. And so there's that. I'm going to do that this coming summer. I want to swim the Fovo Strait, which is between Stewart Island and this most southern tip of mainland New Zealand. But there's also on Stewart Island a massive track to hike around. So I thought very few people have swam Stewart Island to Invercargill, which is the Fovo Strait. Few people have done it, but I don't think anyone swam the Fovo then gone hiking on Stewart Island or running around the island. So that's something else I've got in mind. I think my dream trip that I want to do with my wife, who's into cycle touring, she doesn't swim, but she hikes and she rides bike. We want to ride her bike from Croatia down through to Greece and then into Cyprus and Crete. That's the dream trip that we have as something we'll do together, not just about my swimming. And through the people I've been meeting, I'd like to just find different rivers that are clean and to swim around the world. But one of my goals that I want to do, oddly enough, is from my hometown. I never ever swam the Humber River, which flows into my hometown from a little bit further inland in Newfoundland. And I don't think anyone's ever swam that. I'd be surprised if someone had. And I'd compare the strength of that river to the Clutha. So that's a river that I'd like to do, I don't know, in a way, come full circle where I grew up. Haven't been able to go home for a while. So when I do, I'd like to do that. And, I want to be cycle touring, hiking, and, swim touring pretty much anywhere that's really, really nice to look at and with good company. So, that's the sort of thing I have in mind.
Flipping heck. So is there going to be a Downriver Nomad 2 then? Off the back
funny you should ask. Several weeks ago, I started writing my second book. It won't be all about, Downriver Nomad was my life up until I swam the Clutha. And that was, a therapeutic exercise for me, and something I just always wanted to do is write about my adventures. And just on that note, when I started writing, I didn't think I was going to include the childlessness part of it. I thought I was just going to write about triathlon and marathon swimming. Pardon me. But as I started writing and realized, I thought, oh yeah, I'm over that childlessness thing. I don't need to write about that. And then I realized when I started writing, I was like, you know what? I'm not over that. And so writing it down and talking it through with people and, having this podcast, for example, and, being out in expeditions, we're sleeping out in tents or in the huts out here in the backcountry in New Zealand, or running through the mountains with people and talking it through with people who've read my book has been, I found, very valuable. And some people have told me they've found that very valuable as well. So what I've got in mind to write about is really delve into the subject of no control and, life being, I guess, inherently chaotic in many ways, and looking for ways to navigate that. So I want to explore that sort of concept of no control and what do you do in the face of life's chaos in the context of endurance sport and building up resilience, and really delving into that concept is what I've got in mind. But that said, as a amateur hobby writer, I've realized that a lot of writers, myself included, when you sit down to write something, what you have in mind to write isn't necessarily what ends up getting written. Because like what I say, my original plan did not include childlessness to write about, but I found, I won't say I had to, but I found out I was very moved to, and I'm very glad I did. So that's what I've got in mind for my second book, and I've got a few other books in mind. I've got a fiction book about endurance sport in mind. Basically someone dealing with trauma and trying to deal with it through endurance sport. I've got a fictional story in mind about that, and like writing, even if you don't have a full-time job, takes a long time. So there's no time frame going to be put on that sort of thing. But I found that, it's become a hobby that I've, really wanted. I don't want to just leave it at what I've done. I'm happy with what I've done, and I'm doing my best to promote it with the limited time that I have. Working full time, training full time, having a relationship, and other things. But
it's never the end, isn't it? I think with the book, it's what I always tell all my author clients, that it's you type the end, it's not the end. There's a whole another great big mountain to climb in order to make sure that people pick up the book and read it. So I credit to you. I know how hard that is. I have written one book or part of a book, but I kind of pick it up from the end and take it onwards, and it's difficult. It's everything is problematic at various points. So well done on that.
Like my wife is a writer as well, and she published her first book, I think it was 2019, called Joyful Eating, and she's a nutritionist, and she wants to be more of a food writer than a nutritionist. She doesn't really want to tell people what to eat. So watching her write that first book was really inspiring, and that's what kind of made me get off my bum, or actually a better way of putting it is getting on my bum to write a book. And she's got her first novel coming out the end of July, and that's a fictional version of this. It's going to be like a self-helpy novel, kind of like some of Paulo Coelho's books, for example, where there's like a life lesson. And anyway, this book she wrote about joyful eating, it's a novel of a woman going through that journey of making peace with her body and making peace with food. And, so she's really chewing her cud with that sort of thing, so to speak. So I'm really going to be chewing my cud with endurance sport and this concept of no control and life being inherently chaotic. But how do you orient yourself in such a way that you can navigate that? And I don't think there's any one way to do that, but the way I've learned to do that is with my triathlon stuff and marathon swimming.
Oh, I love it. Right, listeners, you really have to read this book. It's so good, honestly.
Yes.
I know you weren't going to talk about the childlessness, but for me, I loved all the sport. I like getting into other people's heads. That's probably why I'm a counsellor. But the childlessness, I went through it with you, if you like. I could feel my own stuff percolating. So yeah. do have a read, because it's not many people that talk about it.
It's on Amazon, listeners, and it's called Downriver Nomad, A Triathlete's Adventures and Adversities into the Rapids by Rob Hutchings. We will put the links in the show notes to make sure that you go and buy it. Kindle and paperback. Yes, so it doesn't matter whether how you want to listen to it, whether you want to do it on your iPad or whether you want to read a print copy, then that's cool. Go and buy it. It's definitely worth it, because it's just so much more. As we could talk for hours, because there's just so many more things. Childlessness and the adoption is just a very, a small part of a very, very big story. And I can't wait to find out more about what you're going to be writing. Keep in touch. And also with Tansy as well. Do send over the links as well. I'd love to read what she's been writing as well with avid bookworm.
Absolutely. And incidentally, I don't want to make this sound like shameless self-promotion or wife promotion, I should say, but this novel that she's got coming out, it's called Weight of a Woman, and like I say, it's about a woman making peace with her body. But the sequel to the book, the way she was able to come to terms with childlessness herself. I obviously wrote the factual story of our childlessness journey, and obviously I'm telling it from a man's perspective. What she did is the sequel to this book, Weight of a Woman. The next one, we're hoping to get it out in the world 5 or 6 months later. I can't promise a release date yet because we don't know yet. The book has been written. It's called Tears of a Woman. And what she did was the same two characters that are in this book, Weight of a Woman. She tells the childlessness journey and the adoption journey. It's a fictional story. It's more or less our story, but she did it through a fictional thing. And that's how she processes. She's a really, really creative soul. So she didn't tell it, from mine and her point of view. She told it through a fictional story, but it's more or less, with a few minor differences, what happened with us. And it's the same woman going through the childlessness journey after, first making peace with her body and learning how to eat joyfully. So we're looking forward to her being able to release that as well. But this first novel is out in July 28th.
Perfect timing.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Hey, Rob, I can tell you that I've just seen these two scribbled down the names of those books your wife has written. So you can tell her there's 2 guaranteed sales right there.
Absolutely. We just need to definitely read them, and most importantly review, because I know from my own work that the reviews as well as the purchases. So if you are listening to this and you read Rob's book or you read Tansy's book when it comes out, do pay time to send a review in to wherever you bought it from, because they are worth their weight in gold. They really are.
Well, I do appreciate reviews. I mean, I do have a Goodreads page for my book, Downriver Nomad, and a number of people have
that too. Yeah.
And we appreciate the reviews. And if you do read it, I mean, I invite people to contact me directly through Facebook or Instagram. And my Instagram thing is Downriver_Nomad, title of my book. And I welcome people who just want to tell me their thoughts on the book, whether you liked it or maybe you didn't like it. I welcome the feedback, and it's good inspiration as a hobby writer. Like I say, it's never going to be the thing I make my living off of. It's just something I want to do for the joy of it. So yeah. And I would compare writing a book to being like a triathlon, because I compare the editing phase to that time when you're 3/4 of the way through the race, where you sometimes catch yourself thinking, no one's making me do this. Why am I doing this to myself? But then you push through that, and you get it out there, and you cross the finish line. You're like, woohoo!
I'll take your word for that. I can only do it from books now, but yeah, I'll go with that. I'm going to use that for my next client. Look, you're in a marathon. It's fine. Rob says,
as someone who's done both of those things, I can tell you the feeling is very much the same.
Okay.
Because like I say, I don't make my living from triathlon or writing, and no one is making me do it. And it's hard work, especially when you get 3/4 of the way through it and you start questioning yourself why. And then when you can push through that self-doubt and get to the end, that's very satisfying.
every episode of the podcast. I think
Yeah.
as well. We kind of sit here and think, oh my God, why? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for
Yeah, thank
taking time
you.
to join us.
Thanks for listening. We really hope you found Rob as incredible as we did. We'd love to hear from you if you are equally inspired by Rob and have any adventures of your own planned that you'd like to talk to us about. If you want to find out more about Rob and his adventures, you can find him at www.adventuresoutsidethelanes.com. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast, or you have a great idea for a topic we've not covered yet, or you just want to know something more about, we'd love to hear from you. We want this podcast to have as many voices from across our community as possible, so if something's missing or you just want a deeper dive on it, just let us know. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube channel now, and you can find us on our own website at www.thefullstoppod.com. You can sign up to our listeners list there at the website, which keeps you up to date on what we're up to, and if you'd like to, you can also donate to keep our work going too. As always, it's important for us to remind you, you're not alone.
Today, Rob.
Thank you so much.
It's been
It's
amazing.
wonderful. Really lovely to speak to you. I could talk to you for absolutely hours.
You have.
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah.
I've got to go on holiday now.
No, thank you, Rob.
Well-
Absolutely fascinating.